Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. This morning I sat down with Mayor Tory to discuss the Liberal government's 2017 budget. We both agreed on one important fact: a Premier who got elected on the promise that they would fight for the City of Toronto has clearly turned her back on this great city. The Liberals have ignored almost every promise that the Premier made to the City of Toronto. Right. Instead, they sent down a minister to say John Tory had crossed the line. Standing up for the City of Toronto isn't crossing the line. Right. It's honouring the promises they made, which they have broken to the City of Toronto. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is when is this Premier going to actually honour the commitments she made and make sure we actually support the City of Toronto?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Premier.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Well,
Stop the clock. The member from Prince Edward Hastings will withdraw. And not to be done again. Carry on.
thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me first say, Mr. Speaker, that I have a very strong working relationship with mayors across this province, Mr. Speaker. I work with them, I go to their gatherings, I listen to their concerns. I believe that the municipal level of government is extremely important to the well-being of the whole province, Mr. Speaker, and I meet with Mayor Tory on a regular basis. So let me just talk about the ways in which we have invested and supported Toronto, Mr. Speaker. And you know, there's no government in the history of this province that has invested more in housing and transit in the City of Toronto. So let me just first also let me note that we have earmarked $30 billion more for infrastructure in the province, and a proportion of that, a large proportion of that, will go to the City of Toronto over the next decade for future projects, Mr. Speaker. And I'll speak more in my supplementary.
Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Premier. And
member from Beaches East York.
What happened 10 years ago doesn't do much for the future. Listing off highlight reels doesn't help with the immediate infrastructure needs of the City of Toronto. Now, one very serious example Mayor Tory raised was the stories about people living in Toronto community housing who, when they get convicted of a crime, when these people are jailed, they're allowed to jump the queue. We have 82,000 people on the waiting list for Toronto community housing, and someone who is a convicted criminal can jump the queue over those families. That is outrageous. And I don't understand how this government could continue to support allowing violent criminals and drug dealers to jump the queue over our most vulnerable in our city. Mr. Speaker, this is shameful. Mayor Tory and City Council have made this request of the province. Yes or no, will you stop this practice? Will you allow the province to make sure convicted criminals don't get to jump the queue for social housing?
Minister of Housing.
Minister of Housing.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and thank you for that very interesting question, because it is factually incorrect. The province. And I am so disappointed that the Leader of the Opposition wouldn't at least check his facts before he stood up on TV and spread that falsehood. Speaker, here's how it works.
I will offer the Minister a warning as much as I did for the Leader. Stay away from there. Carry on.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, the only legislation, the only regulation that this province puts in place is that victims of domestic violence get priority, not what the Leader of the Opposition is saying. It's absolutely wrong. Get the facts straight, Mr. Speaker.
Stop. Be seated, please. Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier, and the Liberal government seems to be oblivious to the fact that the entire City Council and Mayor John Tory made this request, and the wording is the provincial legislation needs to be changed. Right now, because of the wording disadvantage, you're allowed to jump the queue a convicted drug dealer or anyone who's committed a violent offence. The entire Toronto City Council has passed this request.
You really confuse my job when I'm trying to get them to be quiet and you continue.
Mr. Speaker, since I can't get an answer on the convicted criminals being allowed to jump the queue, Toronto Community Housing has one other request, and that's the natural gas purchasing. Because the way the province is set up, Toronto pays $6.3 million more. Mayor Tory has a legitimate question, a legitimate ask. Will the Premier at least acknowledge that if she's not going to hear it?
Thank you. Minister.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I thought I gave a fairly clear answer, and I'll give it again. The province of Ontario gives the only mandate the province of Ontario gives is that those people fleeing domestic violence get priority in this housing. Yeah. So, I can say that Ontario has a long-standing commitment to tackling homelessness and ending chronic homelessness. Speaker, I'll say that again. The only regulation that we have in place is that those people fleeing domestic violence get priority.
Answer.
So, Speaker, with regards to natural gas bulk purchases,